Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Let's Chat. I am so excited to welcome Kevin back to the show. Welcome, Kevin.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It's an honor to be present here again. After our major three-part series, I don't know when was going to be the next time I would be asked to come back.
You're always welcome. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah
Alhamdulillah.
khair. I'm excited for today's topic because it's something new for me as well. I really have no clue what it is, what it means. So today's topic is cybersecurity. So Kevin, go ahead and introduce the topic to us and how you are connected with the topic.
SubhanAllah, Bismillah, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahmanir Rahim. As-salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa al-Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa salam ajma'in. So, alhamdulillah, it's an honor to talk about this topic because I'm just going to get ahead of it. I recently graduated from Kennesaw State University with a bachelor's in cybersecurity, and it's still an emerging field, so much so that actually Kennesaw State's the only university in Georgia right now that offers a degree in this specific field. There are other programs like computer science or law where you can have like a specialty or a certification, but Kennesaw State's the only university in Georgia right now that specifically focuses a degree on this topic. So the thing to know about cybersecurity is that I'm going to dispel myths right away. I like to think of myself as a myth buster. So here's the thing. If you think cybersecurity is all about being in like these cool government rooms where you're surrounded by screens and you get to like punch code and save the world from missiles, get that thought out of your head right away. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be starting fresh and I'm going to be telling you what cybersecurity really entails. Okay.
Okay.
So by definition, cybersecurity is the field that which focuses on protecting information and data systems through security methods, protocols, and procedures. And what most people don't understand is that a lot of what we do is actually non-technical. I myself don't have a lot of technical skills because I don't necessarily focus in that area, because what most people typically see is something that they would expect someone like who has the career pathway of a security engineer. But even that is not exactly how we do it. So to understand cybersecurity, it's actually a very interdisciplinary field. In the years that I've studied this topic, I've had to acquaint myself with topics of sociology, of law, philosophy, psychology, technology, and policy. So that's the thing. If you're entering this field, you got to be prepared to tackle this subject from multiple different methods of thinking, ways of thinking, because most of our problems are not very technical in nature. And actually, Kevin Mitnick, who's one of the world's highest authorities on cybersecurity, and before he became an authority, he was actually one of the most notorious attackers. And here's the fun fact. Most, if not all of his attacks were done without a computer. Now, let that sink in, because you would not imagine that, right? You would not imagine a cybersecurity expert to be able to commit attacks without a computer. You would not expect that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make sense. Like you don't have a computer or a technology and you're doing it without it.
Well, we got to take a little history lesson here, because back
Mm-hmm.
in the 70s, computers were not what they are today. Like, it wasn't until the development of Apple computers that the concept of a computer having a built-in keyboard and screen even existed. Back then, you would usually just punch commands into hole punch paper, put them in a terminal, and then they would do the job. You would code in the instructions by hand, and you would then put them in a computer terminal, and that's what it would do, because a computer really, by its nature, is meant to perform calculations.
Mm-hmm.
Everything we do here, the movement I'm doing right here, is something that's only being enabled due to calculations that are made in the back end of the code. But back in the 70s, there wasn't a screen, there wasn't the cloud, there wasn't the built-in keyboard. Everything, it was just like this big box of integrated circuits and chips and wires that was able to store information. Now, Kevin Mitnick, he was most famous for using a technique known as blue box technology. So he would find a flaw in phone systems that would allow him to make free calls without having to pay anything. And he was able to prank numerous businesses into stealing information. So, into giving him information. So I feel in order to move forward, I have to first educate you on this very big concept that every security expert is expected to know. It's called social engineering. So do you have any idea what that would mean just by the words, social engineering?
Is it something to do with the people?
Exactly. Okay. So social engineering is really the use of conversation, of social interactions, where you can be able to use different methods of manipulation, of conversation, of deception in order to gather information from your target. Like this conversation right now, like in the times we've talked, you have asked me you've asked me certain things of a personal nature. So for all I knew, you could have potentially been asking me to give away personal facts about myself, which you could have used to your advantage. And here's the thing, this is actually because of another thing that people tend to do. Oftentimes when we're making passwords or we're making passcodes, it's often by using words or numbers that are significant to us. Like, look me in the eye right now, and can you tell me, do you have at least one password where you use a number or a word that's of importance to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is a common mistake that many people are making, which makes them highly vulnerable to attacks. Because this conversation right now, for all you know, I could be asking you to give me personal facts about yourself, which then I could use to do certain levels of attacks. Like one of the most famous is brute force attack. I'm just randomly making up passwords in order to gain access to your system. But there's a more advanced version where by gathering these personal facts about yourself, then gaining access to your computer's hash file, which is a file which is typically used to help identify your device. If I gain access to that information, then personal information, there's a specific computer tool that a lot of us security experts are very familiar with called John the Ripper. I pop in your personal details with your hash, and I can get a list of potential passwords that I can use against you. See, that's an example. And oftentimes there's also the concept of social engineering where just by making you lower your defenses, lower your guard, I could make you give up your password to me and you would not even think too much of it. But then I could go back home, try to gain access to your emails or your personal accounts, and I could wreak havoc there.
That's so interesting, Kevin. Sorry to cut you off.
So,
because when you were asking the question that do I have a number or a letter that's significant to me, I was about to say something, but I held back. I'm like, okay.
There you go. That's again why I say in cyber. That's why they say in cybersecurity, you learn tactics from sociological and psychological studies. It's not just technical. You're taking advantage of sociological techniques and psychological methods of manipulation, where by delving into common flaws in human nature, I can be able to trick people into giving me information. And that's actually how Kevin Mitnick committed his attacks. He would use phone calls, just plain phone calls, engaging his targets in conversation, using multiple methods in which he would get them to lower their guard, and without even his targets even thinking twice about it, get them to give up crucial information, which then he can then use to access their systems. And again, that's how I'm explaining how he was able to do his attacks without a computer, without all the fancy malware, without the fancy Trojan horses, without the fancy remote access software that many attackers are familiar with a lot of script kiddies and all that, or the fancy written scripts that experts write and then share on the dark web. Where that's actually how a lot of a majority of the common security vulnerabilities and attacks that occur nowadays. It's because of that, not because of an intelligent piece of programming code that can be instilled into a computer to steal information. No, it can just because a person doesn't know how to keep their mouth shut. So, and another technique, it's called phishing. I could be sending you an email, which if you just skim it, looks like it comes from a legitimate company or organization or someone you trust, but it might be just someone pretending to be that. And they ask you for something like, oh, we want to help you with something. Could you just give us your information? And for all you know, you're giving away your most sensitive credential information to a person who's tricking you, and then that can get them access to your systems. So even just answering an email that if you don't scrutinize it enough, I can trick you right now into allowing me to steal your information. And from that, I can commit certain acts such as identity theft or credit hacking, etc.
Yeah. And the scams, those kind of scams are so common.
Exactly. And so that's the thing. This is the myth I'm dispelling. Most of cybersecurity is protecting systems from that. Oftentimes, it's just people don't know how to keep their mouths shut. I mean, this conversation right now, for all you know, I could be trying to trick you into giving me something useful. You don't know.
So I gotta keep quiet.
But no, that's the thing.
Okay,
it's a
Kevin,
little joke. It's
take
a joke.
over.
It's a joke. It's a joke I like to give to my friends when they ask me why do I, because after a couple years studying this subject, sometimes I don't know how to turn it off. Like sometimes I still have the mentality of a security expert, even when I'm just out in a dinner with my friends, and I like to joke around. Sorry, I studied cybersecurity for 3 years. I've spent 3 years training how to be paranoid. But that's the kind of like the scope of what it is. Like I'm trained to be paranoid, to find what if I do this or what if I do that. And sometimes it's not even just a social interaction. It can be something as simple as a person forgetting to close their laptop when they leave it, or leaving it in the room plain for people to see, and they can sit down there and try and copy some files from your computer for all you know. So most of today's vulnerabilities and security attacks are not really technical in nature. It's because people don't know how to protect their own information or their own devices. It's a matter of becoming too trusting.
Right. Can our credit cards be used for that too?
Absolutely. You know, because we share so much of our credit card information when we make Amazon accounts or when we're ordering something online. An attacker can try gaining access to any of those accounts. And if you save your credit card information there for the sake of making it convenient, if someone gains access to that account, they could also gain access to your credit card information. And bam, identity theft.
It's scary.
Yeah, that's why I also warn my parents, mama, papa, don't make these passwords so simple. Don't use obvious words. Like, I'm not going to go specifically because, again, paranoid, but my parents like to use very obvious facts about themselves, where if you just learn who they are for like 10 minutes, they could potentially figure out a person's, my family's passwords.
I know what you're talking about.
Whereas for me, I create passwords with like 10-digit alphanumeric. So like I'm saying 10 characters with numbers, letters, and special symbols to create enough of a variety where if you try doing a brute force attack, like meaning trying to hard code, trying to guess it, it could take someone as long as 9 billion years.
That's
But
cool. But how do you remember all those then?
I don't. I keep them in a secure place.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes I save them, but only with software that I trust. Otherwise, I put them in a secure place and I will never tell anyone where I keep my passwords.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so because of that, very few cybersecurity experts are actually of that caricature, that idea people have where you're like a expert in a room and you have a bunch of screens in front of you, and if you just like press this button or hard code a quick command, you could save the entire world. Normally, that's a fictionalized, glorified idea of a security operations center. So what that is, we call them SOCs. They're 24-hour facilities which you put in specific experts who are trained in security engineering and security analysis, and they can quickly do incident response, which is like real-time response to any potential security incidents. So that's what I'm gonna go on next. There are many different pathways in security. You can either be many recent graduates like myself often start off as security analysts. So what that is that we use security tools that are provided for us from our companies that scan, review, and monitor systems. And if we find something that's potentially out of the ordinary, we review it. We classify if it's something to be concerned about, whether it is or not. We try to mitigate it, and then we write reports on it. Then we send them to our bosses, and then we move on to the next. That's essentially what an analyst does. But then there are other pathways like the security engineer, where you build systems that are meant to either defend or attack, because there is another pathway called ethical hacking. So what ethical hacking is essentially being an attacker, but for the side of good. Instead of being a malicious attacker who's targeting systems for his own benefit, ethical hackers are hired to break into systems for the explicit purpose of identifying, classifying, and reporting on a company's vulnerabilities and providing those reports to their company so they can give them recommendations on how they can improve their security. So they're hackers who are hired to hack to help find weaknesses. That's another pathway. Now, I want to talk about the pathway that I'm on. I do auditing. So what that means is I work in the field of information security auditing. That means that I review systems and I review policies, procedures, methodologies, and any in technical environments to ensure that they're following the standards, frameworks, policies, and laws that have been set by security experts since cybersecurity became acknowledged as an official field. So I just make sure that things are following the rules, that they're following laws. And I specifically work with SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Those are two of the most famous security standards that exist in today. They create these like controls and different rules for like, this has to be doing this has to be following this standard. I simply go into systems and I prove that they are, and if there are certain areas in which they're not, I identify them, I write reports on them, and I provide evidence on whether it is or isn't following the standards, and what evidence is needed to gather in order to prove that they are following or not following the standards. That's essentially what I do. I've been interning at a company that's owned by one of our brothers, and that's essentially what we do. We simply make sure that things are following the rules, and we prove that they're following the rules.
Nice. So what are the companies like LifeLock doing?
I'm not a very good resource for that because I work remotely, you know. Our entire company is remote work, but speaking with other professionals, their environments are very like typical office based. So, you know, cubicles and standard company culture and all that. And depending on what field you're on, you could have the standard 9 to 5 life, or you could be like one of those people who take like 24-hour to 48-hour shifts, then get time off after that. Or you could be one of those people where the job is so unpredictable, where even if you have a set time to leave, you could be working a lot of after hours because of an emergency or something. So that's the thing. Cybersecurity is so diverse that you can't really put it uh in one single pathway.
Okay, cool. So how, I know this question is like I'm just asking for the sake of it, but we all know that understanding this subject is very, very important. So how relevant it is today, you know?
It's very relevant simply even if you don't want to know the professional level at a professional level, knowing at beginner's level will help immensely. And actually, there's another field in which you can specialize in, which is uh SIRT. So basically where you focus on raising security awareness, security education, and security training.
Mhm.
You know, where we simply give tips and guidance to the average layman of what they can do to better protect their systems. Like we tell you, make better passwords. Do not do this while you're in a workplace. And actually, many companies are adopting these as now part of their company policies, where employees on their onboarding process, when they're in their training, they're taught these very basic security principles in order to protect the company information or company devices. So even if you're not special, even if you don't work in the field, you're gonna be interacting with it in one way or another. That's almost a guarantee these days.
Yeah. Yeah, so we all, we're all using internet. Everything is online. We have bank accounts, we have social media accounts, we have like we talked about Amazon, we buy online, we sell online, we do so much online that most of our life is actually spending
Not just that.
online. Yeah,
Now these days, gas, electricity,
yeah,
air travel, train travel,
yes.
traffic control, all of that now is being run by the internet.
Internet, exactly. So dig deeper into this. One time I had an incident where it was an email from PayPal asking me to put my social security, and PayPal does ask for it. I found out later, but I got so panicked because I did put it in, and then I felt like I was scammed or something, and I got panicked, and we started the LifeLock services for some time, and it's been a while, and alhamdulillah, nothing bad happened, but I still feel nervous about discontinuing that service, you know. Um,
What I
Another
can say right
thing,
now.
yeah.
Oh, no, you finish first, please.
No, go ahead because the question is going to be another different
Okay,
direction. So,
so what I can say is you were definitely acting in the right instinct because most of the time, if something is asking you to give away something like your social security number, you should your first thought should be ignore it because by law, you're under no you should no one should be under any obligation to like ask that information of you unless they're a business that has the authorization to do that.
mhm,
So you were following your right instincts because most of the time people fall under this type of attack way too often,
yeah,
where they're asked to give their banking information or their social security information or their ID numbers.
Yeah.
That instinct that tells you, well, probably not a good idea. I can honestly say 95% of the time, that's the right thought.
Yeah, because after that, I learned my lesson. And since then, I'm extremely careful and I teach my kids to be careful, because my daughter is still young, but my son is at an age where he has online accounts and stuff. So very, very like strictly, we have taught them not to give out any of the important information. So the second question I was coming up to was, I learned, and I'm not going to disclose how, but I learned that a lot of data is transferred outside the country to be processed for some reason. For example, like doctors' offices, and they are either they're hiring legally or not. I have no idea. But what I know is the data is being transferred, and the people over there, their employees, are working in the billing and coding areas, and they have all our details. They have our social security numbers, and that's the worst. But they also have our health history, or all medical history, everything about us. So I don't think that's in our control. I cannot control that. If my doctor is going to be asking me for my social security and I have to give it, and all of my medical history is with the doctor, and even though they are not supposed to disclose it, they are still hiring people. They're outsourcing these jobs, and these people do have your complete information, and they can do whatever they want with it. What do you got to say about that?
All I can really say is that, and this might come rich from a person who just admitted that he spent 3 years training to be paranoid. It's really just a matter of trust. I can't really say anything other than that because, and let me give you an analogy. When you hire an accountant, if they work for a bank, they're going to be trusted with millions of dollars. Like, you're going to be trusting these people with millions upon millions of dollars and trusting that they're going to not do anything funny with them. Funny with it.
Yeah.
And so when you have data custodians and data engineers and data managers, you have to go there because, see, and this is something that actually in my curriculum, we were taught from day one on our introduction to cybersecurity textbook. Information security is not a goal. It's a process. What that means is that it's something that's continuously having to improve. There's always going to be some new vulnerability, some new threats, some new potential way they can exploit our information. But at the same time, it also means that you can never have a 100% protected system, because if you do have that, that means no one would be able to get in. And how that's not realistic, because we still need to get into our systems. We still need to get into our devices in order to do our jobs, in order to communicate with relatives, in order to buy, in order to participate online. So every day when we're using our computers, when we're using our mobile devices, doesn't matter how small it is, there's always going to be that risk. The risk that one little action we do can cause everything to go downhill.
Mm-hmm.
We have to live with that risk every day. So that's why I'm telling everyone in this who's watching this up front, you can never have a 100% impenetrable system, because then how are you going to be able to use it? How are you able to go into your computer and do what you got to do on your computer?
Yeah.
Unless you would rather not see your computer again, you're just going to have to live with it. It's never going to be 100% impregnable.
Right. But it's scary. Like, I recently got my almost 20-year-old Facebook account hacked, and I lost everything. Like, there were so many pictures and videos of my children growing up, and I've lost them, and there's no way of recovery. but but I think that was a bot hack, like some system that hacked in, and then Facebook just discontinues that account, deactivates it.
I lost my old Instagram account too. Like, and here's the thing: I'm someone who has gotten a degree in this field, and yet I fell for a trick. That just goes to show, even experts. I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm nowhere near an expert. I've just gotten started in my field, but even experts can be tricked. It just takes the right type of manipulation, whether it's from a social interaction or from a technical whiz. The second you use a computer, and often actually sometimes you don't even need to have a computer on order for it to be used for something, because there's actually a form of attack called zombie bot attacks, where they use old computers that never had their hard drives wiped. They can use those as endpoints from which they can create an attack matrix. So even a computer that's not being used can be utilized for an attack. So even when you turn off your mobile devices, or even when you're not using them, you still live with that risk.
Oh, you mean like an old computer which we're like not using anymore?
And whose hard drive was never wiped, thus leaving a lot of old account information still in there.
Oh.
But even if we're currently using a device, even if it's turned off, well, not turned off, I would say not in use, like sleep mode, it could still be used. So, so that's the thing. We took up this risk the second we started using these devices.
And how do these? Yeah, that's scary. So how do these hackers, they get into your computer from external sources, and they can turn on the cameras? And we have heard of stories like somebody's camera got turned on and they got recorded, some all these kind of things.
Type of software that's called remote access software. From there, attackers, as long as they manage to establish a connection with a device, can institute commands there remotely, thus allowing them to control devices from a distance. That's one way.
And how can we be safe from that?
Well, again, by following the SETA protocols, SETA, security, education, training, and awareness. By following the recommendations of our security experts, who tell us to install multi-factor authentication, have advanced passwords, follow their recommendations, you greatly reduce the risk, because oftentimes 90% of attackers will give up if they can't brute force their way in. If you're an actual hacking expert, you have to be willing to be patient, because actually in the ethical hacking field, they don't just do an attack daily. Nope. They can sometimes spend up to weeks or months just sitting there in their stations, examining, monitoring, analyzing systems to even just find one backdoor, one vulnerability, one weakness. So if you're an actual really good hacker, you're willing to be patient, but most hackers are not these days. So if you can have these basic protocols already set in your accounts and in your devices, you'll be good most of the time. And most of the very experienced hackers, they're not going to go after people like you or me, because they're usually going after information or finances that's going to be of massive benefit to them. So oftentimes, that's why you usually just watch and read stories of corporations or organizations being the ones that are being attacked. But the average layperson can still provide that one vulnerability, that one backdoor, simply because they weren't vigilant enough with their own devices. And from there, the patient hacker who's just waiting for someone to screw up, and they see that one little mistake, and they'll go in. like a snake.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if this is not something that's completely alleviating, but it's not meant to. In this field, you learn the truth of what it's like to live in the digital world, and that means you're never 100% protected. You got to live with that fear every day. That's why, again, I say I've spent 3 years
Uh-huh.
training to be paranoid,
I know.
because
Yeah.
that's what you eventually become the more you learn about just just what and how your systems can be exploited, and what certain things can be exploited. Or even right now, just us talking, like I said, for all we know, I could be trying to get something out of you, and you don't
Mhm.
know it for certain. You don't know for certain if I'm not.
Yeah. So
And that scares you a bit, doesn't it?
it does. It totally does. But now, like, I can be more careful. I can be more cautious. Like when we started this conversation, you talked about the passwords, and I was able to hold back myself because I was about to say something, and then I realized, okay, if I say this, and it's a very common thing, and I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about, but that's a mistake we all do, and I just didn't want it to say that. But I gotta like go over my passwords now. Definitely.
I just prove you, how you most of the time you don't even need like fancy scripts or code, or like these big uh these big stations with all these different servers and screens and and computers in order to do the job. Sometimes it just takes a clever person taking advantage of a conversation, and then just waiting for the right moment for where I seem friendly, but I
Mm-hmm.
ask you something which can make you just spill all your secrets to me.
Right.
And you don't know. Like,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. And that's sometimes a little scary because, and I've actually scared a couple brothers at the masjid when because I told this the same thing to them. And it's like, and unfortunately, it's like, even though we're Muslim brothers and sisters, it's like for a second you start wondering, can I even trust my brothers and sisters now?
Of course. I mean, you definitely have to be careful in that regard. You cannot blind trust anybody. It doesn't matter who it is.
Absolutely. And and Islam actually teaches us, that there are certain things that we should be keeping private,
Mhm.
where even if we trust our brothers and sisters with our lives, there are just certain things you don't say to people. There are just certain things that remain solely between you and Allah. And I think that's now, after like really looking at it, I feel like now that because I'm in a cybersecurity field, I feel like this was one of mm, I couldn't have possibly known about it, but Allah knows everything. So this was probably one of his many, many wisdoms as to why he commands us to keep our mouths shut in certain situations. Allahu Allah.
I was about to go there too,
Allahu Allah.
mashallah. Yes, absolutely. There's benefit in keeping quiet, of course. SubhanAllah. And I've seen that people who talk a lot, nothing against them, but they do give out a lot of unwanted information, and they should be careful about, because when we're talking a lot, we don't really think what's coming out of our mouth, and we give out a lot more than we should.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of this too, because I don't believe I've ever given out like personal information, but even in our previous podcast, like I've given, and at the masjid when I just try to relate it to a certain story of my childhood, and I sometimes see the look on their faces, and I wonder, wow, Kevin, you really experienced this? Because some people, maybe because of the way I present myself or my attitude, or because of how I look at things, some people find it hard to believe that I grew up in a difficult environment, because most people would think, oh, then why aren't you a gay? Why aren't you into all this haram stuff? And I'm like,
Mhm.
just because I grew up in it doesn't mean I'm destined to go down that route. But when I tell them about my childhood experiences, the environment that I grew up with, they don't tell you, but you get the look on their faces where they're like, man, how did this kid grow up with that and yet come to Islam? You know what I mean?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. But that's the thing.
Yeah.
there are sometimes there is a wisdom to where you just have, there are just some things that you keep that's best kept to yourself.
Yes.
Like, because even though I'm not ashamed of how I grew up, it does sometimes cause like bewilderment and issues for me when I become very candorous about the situations and the environment that I grew up with.
Mm,
Because it sometimes, like, what if I'm in a job interview? It's like you don't just spill out something like that right away.
right.
And also, and again, in a professional standpoint, even if you're really good but friends with your coworkers, there are just certain things you have to keep to yourself, you know? Again, one of the many wisdoms I believe of why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to practice holding our tongues. Not
Yeah,
just with cursing or foul language, but with being more careful of anything we say in general.
exactly. SubhanAllah.
And this is just one of the many one of the many situations where I've seen the wisdom in that. Because in cybersecurity, it would definitely help you if you learn to keep your mouth shut more often.
Good. Alhamdulillah that I'm not a big talker.
But this I mean, the fact that you, even for a nanosecond, were complied, you nearly felt compelled to share something that you shouldn't share with me. That
Mhm.
just shows how much psychologic, just how much of a level of sociology is implemented into cybersecurity, and you don't even notice it.
That's true. That is true. SubhanAllah. Well, wonderful. It was an amazing topic, and I would love to learn it in more details, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And just let's close with some a short review, maybe. Kevin, go ahead, give us a quick review of what cybersecurity is and what should we do to stay safe out there.
Absolutely. So, just to conclude, to make sure that everyone followed suit, cybersecurity is an interdisciplinary field, meaning that there are multiple pathways, multiple methodologies with which one can pursue a career, but also become a victim of the nefarious element that exists in this field. Where to protect yourself from criminals, you often don't just need to like keep your devices safe. You also sometimes keep your own personal actions safe. Because as I've just finished explaining, even a conversation can be a way where a stranger who might seem friendly can really be an attacker seeking to get something out of you. And ways in which you can mitigate that is, one, of course, following the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Be mindful of what you're saying to people. Two, go to security education and awareness programs. And there are plenty out there that are free, or watch something on a YouTube video where experts give you recommendations on how to best protect any of your systems. Make sure you have advanced passwords. Make sure they're randomized. I highly recommend not making your passwords out of something that can be easily used to identify you. So like your likes, your dislikes, your favorite movies, or your pets' names, or your children's names, or specific numbers or dates that mean something to you. I highly recommend refraining from using that information, because that can easily be used to reverse engineer your passwords. Then three, always follow the security recommendations and keep your browsers, keep your applications updated. Do not delay on downloading the latest security patches, because another way attackers are able to gain access is because people neglect to download the latest security patches, to update their applications. And
Mhm.
from there, an attacker who remembers how to take advantage of a certain vulnerability, which for most systems has been mitigated, for an old system that has not yet updated, they can go there. Because there are still people who still use like Windows XP, Windows Vista, and from there they also have to live with all the vulnerabilities and security errors that come from still using those old operating systems. Where attackers who remember and document how the old attack methods they used to use can dig an oldie but goodie back up, use it to attack this person who refuses to update their patches. And lastly, if someone tells you to get multi-factor authentication, get two-factor authentication, take in different methods, use these apps that give you multiple layers of security where you don't just put in your password, but then you also have to get passcodes and have these things texted you. Get those, because those are going to save your life, because getting one piece of authentication is hard enough, but if you have a second layer that's available only to you, that will make an attacker's job that much harder. And actually, I'm going to admit, the reason my old Instagram was hacked was because someone tricked me into taking off my multi-factor authentication. There we go. So take this from a person who made that mistake himself. If you already have it on, great. And if anyone tries to tell you to take it off, don't. Keep it on. So those are the common ways in which you can very well secure your information. And if you see, and yes, I admit, updating your software, it's a pain, and you don't like how it comes in all of a sudden, but you have to do it. Otherwise, you're going to be leaving your computer with different vulnerabilities that could have been avoided if you just took the time to update your device. So yeah, educate yourself, follow the recommendations of experts, and keep your systems updated.
Yeah, great. And all these tips are going to help us when we're using our devices outside our homes, like maybe in a coffee shop, library, something like that, because it worries me. I do use my devices, but I try not to log into my important accounts, like my bank account. I would not try to, I would avoid logging in. Is that a good thing to do?
Yeah, and I would also look into using other methods of authentication, because there are other ones called APIs, application programming interfaces. Then there's the use of tokens. I could go further on about those, but this is an introductory course, so I'm not going to go into the specifics there. But just know that there are other ways in which you can make sure you authenticate yourself without giving away crucial information.
Okay, awesome. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for your time, Kevin. It was very informative, and hopefully people are going to learn a little bit more than they already knew, just by, being very careful about using internet anywhere, because it's literally everywhere we use internet. We're always online. We never go
mindful of
offline.
any suspicious emails or suspicious
Yeah.
calls, or
Yeah.
even suspicious people.
Yes. So take your time, guys. Don't respond right away. Don't be in a rush. Take your time. Like I mentioned, my situation with the PayPal, I kind of responded to that immediately, and that's why I panicked. Usually I ask, it's really common in our culture, but I asked my husband about before doing something, but that day I didn't, and it ended up.
Alhamdulillah, that attitude really helps, because even my parents, even though they're not very well versed in technology, I've given them enough of education of what I go through as a cybersecurity student, that when they see something that's like suspicious or not or out of line, they ask me right away. they have the mindfulness to ask me, should I respond to this call? Should I respond to this email? And I'm able to help them, prevent them from giving away something that they'll probably expose our entire house.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Yep. So be careful, everybody. Inshallah, may Allah protect all of us from any kind of harm. And thank you so much, Kevin, for the very important information. And I hope that it benefits the listeners, inshallah. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening in. Inshallah, we'll come again with something else and something more interesting. All right. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.